You know Jaws, right? The terrifying shark movie that basically invented the idea of a summer blockbuster? Well, by the fourth sequel, they had the shark following one specific family across thousands of miles of ocean because it had a personal grudge. Yes, that actually happened. Today we're talking about tons of different horror movie sequels that looked at their original IP's brilliant ideas and flushed them down the toilet just to make some money on a cheap sequel. So let's start with the granddaddy of stupid sequels. Jaws scared people out of the water in 1975 because it was smart about being a monster movie. You barely saw the shark. Most of the terror came from that music and your own brain filling in the blanks. Spielberg knew the mechanical shark looked ugly and fake, so he hid it. Brilliant move. The whole thing felt real, just regular people dealing with a killer animal that didn't care about their summer vacation plans. The movie worked because the shark was just a shark. It had no backstory, no feelings, and no grand plan. It was hungry. People were in the water, bad things happened. Simple. Then 1987 rolled around and gave us Jaws: The Revenge. This movie looked at everything that made the original work and decided to do the exact opposite. The shark in this one had a personal vendetta against the Brody family. Not sharks in general, but just this specific shark. It follows them from New York to the Bahamas because apparently great whites are really good at holding grudges. Oh, and it roars. The shark roars because nothing says realistic ocean predator like a fish that sounds like a lion with anger issues. The best part, Michael Caine showed up for this disaster and later said he never actually watched the movie, but he saw the house it bought him. At least he was honest about the cash grab. By the time this thing was over, they had turned one of the most effective movie monsters into a cartoon villain with fins. The shark that once made me afraid to go in the bathtub as a kid was now following people around the ocean like a very wet, very angry stalker. But Jaws wasn't the only classic horror movie that got turned into a comedy. Wes Craven had a genuinely scary idea with Nightmare on Elm Street. A killer who gets you in your dreams? That's horrifying, because everyone has to sleep eventually. The original Freddy was this burned, shadowy figure who barely spoke. When he did crack jokes, they were dark and twisted. He felt dangerous, unpredictable. Plus, the whole concept messed with your head. How do you fight something that attacks you when you're unconscious? The movie took its time building dread. Those dream sequences felt genuinely surreal and threatening. Nancy's final confrontation, where she turns her back on Freddy, was clever. It wasn't just hit the monster with an axe, it was psychological warfare. Then the sequels started coming. Each one made Freddy a little more chatty and a little more silly. By the time we got to Freddy's Dead in 1991, they had turned a nightmare demon into a stand-up comedian with a burned face. This movie opens with a Nietzsche quote and then immediately has Freddy say, "Welcome to primetime!" Yeah, that should tell you everything about how seriously they were taking this. The kills in Freddy's Dead are just embarrassing. One guy gets sucked into a Nintendo game, complete with Power Glove reference because apparently Freddy keeps up with the gaming trends of like the 1980s. Another victim gets killed by a hearing aid that makes his head explode. These aren't scary deaths, they're Looney Tunes sketches, but with blood. The whole thing plays out with 3D gimmicks and one-liners that sound like they were written by someone who had never seen the original movie. Yeah. They took a character who represented inescapable terror and turned him into the horror equivalent of a Las Vegas act. And speaking of directors destroying their own work, let's talk about Tobe Hooper's original Texas Chain Saw Massacre. It felt dangerous. Everything about it screamed, this actually happened. The grainy film stock, the sweaty actors, the way the camera never looked away from the horror. You spent 90 minutes thinking you might be watching real footage of people getting murdered by cannibals in rural Texas. What made it brilliant was restraint. Despite that title, you barely see any blood. Hooper let your imagination do the heavy lifting, while Leatherface and his family just acted like regular people who happened to eat other people. No jokes, no winking at the camera, just pure, nasty terror that felt you leaving gross for days. Cut to 1986 and Hooper comes back for the sequel and apparently decided his masterpiece was too scary. The Texas Chain Saw Massacre 2 opens with Leatherface having a chainsaw fight with Dennis Hopper while heavy metal music plays in the background. Gone is the documentary realism. Now we get Leatherface acting like a lovesick teenager around the main girl. The whole thing turned into a gore-soaked comedy show. Bill Moseley shows up as Chop Top, a character who acts like he's auditioning for a cartoon. Leatherface also goes from terrifying cannibal to bumbling annoying comic relief who dances around with his chainsaw. Roger Ebert went on to give it 1 star and said it played more like a geek show than actual horror. Here's the kicker: Hooper made both movies. He looked at his own Perfect Nightmare and thought, you know what this needs? More laughs and way more blood. TV Guide actually accused him of having contempt for his original work. When critics think you hate your own movie, maybe that's a sign you just went too far. At least Hooper was working with his own characters though, because some sequels just swap them out entirely. The first Friday the 13th wasn't trying to change cinema forever. It just wanted to scare teenagers and make some money. Fair enough. What it did well was play by slasher rules. Mysterious killer picking off camp counselors one by one, with that famous twist ending revealing Jason's mom as the murderer. It's simple, effective, and that lake jump scare still gets people. 4 movies later, they had painted themselves into a corner. They killed Jason for good in the final chapter, which should have been a hint about their plans. But Big Daddy Paramount wanted more money, so they made the next part anyways. Here's where things get stupid. Since Jason was dead, they decided to use a fake Jason. Not zombie Jason, not resurrected Jason, but some random paramedic named Roy who puts on a hockey mask because his son died at a halfway house. That's the big reveal. You wait the whole movie for Jason Voorhees to show up, and instead you get Roy. Like, who the is Roy? Fans hated this so much that the next movie brought real Jason back from the dead with a lightning bolt. Yes, they literally had to resort to Frankenstein logic to undo the damage that this movie did. The whole movie just feels like a bait and switch. You're promised Jason Voorhees and you get Dave from paramedic school. Plus, they moved the action from Camp Crystal Lake to some weird halfway house that has none of the atmosphere that made the original work. It's like ordering a Big Mac and getting a turkey sandwich from a gas station next door. I'm at McDonald's. Why is there a turkey sandwich? The negative reaction was so strong, they basically pretended this part had never even happened. When your own franchise disowns your sequel, you know you've really screwed up. But at least Friday the 13th waited 5 movies to completely lose the plot. Unlike American Psycho, and it gave us one of the best movie psychopaths ever. Christian Bale's Patrick Bateman was terrifying because you never knew what was real and what was just his delusional fantasy. This character was so well done that there are a ton of like 5'5" white boys that base their entire personality on this guy. I am not joking with you. I have met multiple of them. They either think they're like Patrick Bateman or like the rapper G-Eazy. There is no in between. If anyone else knows someone like this, please comment down below. I can't be the only one. I know multiple. Anyways, Mary Herron made this sharp, funny horror film that ripped apart 1980s yuppie culture while keeping you guessing about Bateman's actual body count. Perfect ending too. Ambiguous, unsettling, and complete. 2 years later, we got American Psycho 2, and if you haven't seen this, I don't blame you, because guess who's the main character? Meg from Family Guy. Yes, Mila Kunis plays a college student who kills her classmates to get a teaching assistant job. That is the plot. Oh, in the opening 5 minutes, they kill off Patrick Bateman. Not as the main story though, just in some throwaway flashback where Kunis's character murders him as a kid. Yes, they took one of cinema's most famous serial killers and had him get offed by Meg. Christian Bale didn't even show up for this. So like, smart move on his part, not trashing away his legacy. The rest plays out like any generic campus slasher you'd find in a Walmart bargain bin, which is where this movie went. Gone is the social commentary, the dark humor, and the psychological depth. Now it's just a girl stabbing people with kitchen knives so she can impress her criminology professor. William Shatner shows up as said professor, and he's probably wondering what he did to deserve this. Here's the thing that makes this even more insulting. This wasn't even written as an American Psycho sequel originally. They took some random college killer script and slapped the American Psycho name on it. That explains why it has nothing to do with the first movie, except that one scene where they murder the main character from the original. Direct-to-video cash grabs don't usually get much worse than this, but you're looking at the time bar in this video and you're realizing there's a lot more to go, so they get worse, because some sequels went on to manage to disrespect even bigger names. Alfred Hitchcock, pause, made The Birds in 1963 and never explained why the birds went crazy. Smart choice. Sometimes the scariest thing about a horror movie is not knowing why the horror is happening. Hitchcock built this perfect slow burn from romantic comedy to avian nightmare, then ended it with no answers, just survivors driving away while thousands of birds watch them go. The ambiguity made the movie legendary. There was no sequel needed. The mystery was the point. 31 years later, some TV executives looked at this masterpiece and thought, you know what was missing? terrible special effects, and a plot that makes no sense. The Birds 2, Land's End showed up on television in 1994. The director, Rick Rosenthal, was so embarrassed by the final product, he took his name off of it and used the fake name Alan Smithy instead. What do you think about that, Flapjack? That's just shilly, right? When your director won't even admit he made your movie, that is not a good sign. Tippi Hedren pops up for a cameo, but not as her character from the original, so why bother? The birds attacking people premise gets recycled with zero style, cheap effects, and some half-hearted environmental message about why the birds are mad this time. Remember how scary it was not knowing why they attacked? Well, now you know. And it's boring. The bird attacks also look like someone threw rubber chickens at actors who forgot they were supposed to act scared. This was none of Hitchcock's slow building dread. None of his visual tricks. Just people running around screaming at what are obviously fake birds on strings. Land's End answered the question nobody asked. What happened after Hitchcock's movie ended? Turns out, nothing worth watching. The sequel exists purely to trade on a famous title while delivering none of what made the title famous. But TV movies aren't the only way to destroy a classic horror film. Let's talk about Rosemary's Baby. Roman Polanski understood that the scariest horror happens in your head. Rosemary's Baby never shows you the demon child, just Mia Farrow's horrified reaction when she sees it. What have you done to its eyes? She screams, and we never find out. Our imagination fills in something worse than any special effect could deliver. That final shot of Rosemary rocking the cradle is chilling because it leaves everything unresolved. Is she accepting her role as the mother to the Antichrist? Has she gone insane? Who knows? That's what makes it brilliant. 8 years later, TV executives decided viewers were too stupid for ambiguity. Just remember, every single Hollywood executive thinks you're an idiot and can't figure out things for yourself. So just keep that in mind whenever you go watch your next movie. Look What's Happened to Rosemary's Baby arrived in 1976 to answer every question that nobody wanted answered. Also, that title is horrible. Like literally that looks like it was optimized for SEO search on Google or YouTube. That is so boring. The sequel follows Adrian, Rosemary's son, as he grows out. Turns out he looks completely normal, which immediately kills any sense of otherworldly dread. There's no mysterious deformity, no signs of his demonic heritage, just some kid dealing with standard Satan cult drama. They got Patty Duke to play older Rosemary, and then killed her off early because why would you want the main character from the original hanging around? Whole thing plays out like a checklist. Here's the kid being tempted, here's him accepting evil, here's him having his own demon baby to set up another sequel that thankfully never fucking happened. Ruth Gordon also came back as Minnie Castavette, probably for the paycheck honestly, but even she couldn't save this mess. When your TV movie sequel is so bad that critics call it worse than Exorcist 2, you've really achieved something special. And we talked about Exorcist 2 in the last video in this series, so you know it's bad. The original movie asked disturbing questions about motherhood, faith, and evil. The sequel answered them with the most boring possible explanations. Sometimes though, Hollywood just copies the homework entirely, just like I did in my high school years. Stephen King wrote Carrie as a tragedy. Bullied kid gets telekinetic powers, snaps at prom, kills everyone including herself. Done. Complete story with a definitive ending. Carrie White is dead, buried, and occasionally reaching out of graves to grab ankles in nightmares. Brian De Palma's movie nailed this perfectly. Sissy Spacek made you feel sorry for Carrie even as she's murdering her entire graduating class. That prom sequence is iconic. The pig blood, the laughing faces, the school burning down. There is no sequel needed. The story was over. But 1999 Hollywood looked at this closed book and decided to write fan fiction. The Rage. Carrie 2 introduces Rachel, Carrie's secret half-sister who also has telekinetic powers because genetics work that way in horror movies, and why not?
It's a trait, Rachel, you've inherited. Telekinesis. The ability to move objects with your mind.
The plot is just Carrie again with different characters. Awkward girl gets picked on by popular kids, develops crush on nice boy, mean kids pull a cruel prank, girl uses powers to kill everyone at a party. They even brought back Amy Irving from the original movie as a guidance counselor, and then killed her off for no reason except to remind you of the better movie you could be watching. But no, for some dumb reason you're choosing to waste an hour and a half of your life watching the sequel. Everything that made Carrie special gets reduced to a template. The original dealt with religious religious fanaticism, sexual repression, and genuine teenage cruelty. The sequel deals with jocks being jerks and has a soundtrack that sounds like late 90s MTV. Rachel's big freakout happens at some rich kid's house party instead of prom night. There's less symbolic weight in the same telekinetic carnage. It's Carrie without understanding what made Carrie work in the first place. King had nothing to do with this sequel, which explains why it feels like someone describing the original movie to someone who had never had seen it. But unfortunately, other sequels don't even bother changing the settings. Let's talk about Cube. Low-budget horror works best when it knows what it can't afford to show you. Cube had 6 actors, some metal rooms, and a bunch of deadly traps. That's it. No backstory about who built the cube or why. No explanation for how people got there. Just pure survival horror with a mathematical puzzle thrown in. The mystery was the point. You spent the whole movie trying to figure out the rules alongside with the characters. Prime numbers, trap patterns, who designed this thing and why. The movie never told you. Some government experiment maybe? Corporate testing? Alien intelligence? Pick your favorite theory and run with it. 5 years pass and Cube 2, Hypercube, decides mystery is overrated. Now the Cube is an interdimensional testing facility built by a defense contractor called Eazon. Yes, they named the evil corporation Eazon. Subtle. Suddenly we're dealing with parallel realities, time loops, and floating tesseracts instead of simple death traps. The clean, terrifying geometry of the original gets replaced by CGI nonsense that looks like a Windows 95 screensaver having a seizure. Remember how scary it was when someone would step into the wrong room and get diced by razor wire? Well, now people get aged to death by time distortion or absorbed into alternate dimensions. The traps went from being mechanically brutal to being scientifically stupid. The whole thing feels like someone watched the original and thought, you know what this needs? More special effects and way less tension. They took a claustrophobic nightmare and turned it into a confusing sci-fi movie that explains away all the dread. By the end, you know exactly who built the cube, why they built it, and how it works. Congratulations! It's not scary anymore. And speaking of movies that originally had perfect endings that definitely didn't need sequels, let's talk about Neil Marshall's The Descent. If you've never seen it, I'll tell you one thing. It ends perfectly. Sarah makes it out of the cave, drives away, and then suddenly she's back underground, hallucinating her escape while the creatures close in. Fade to black, done. It's bleak, hopeless, and absolutely final. She is so dead. Well, that's the UK ending anyways. The US version lets her actually escape, but still, either way the story was complete. Sarah faced her trauma, literal and metaphorical, and the cave claimed her or didn't. Clean finish. 4 years later, The Descent Part 2 shows up, immediately ruins both possible endings. In the sequel, rescue teams find Sarah wandering around with amnesia and somehow convince her to go back into the same cave system to look for her friends. You know, the friends who are definitely dead because we watched them die in the first movie. This setup makes no sense from any angle. If Sarah escaped, why would she go back? If she never escaped and it was all a hallucination, how is she suddenly outside giving interviews to police? The sequel wants to have it both ways and succeeds at neither. What follows is just The Descent again, but worse. Same cave creatures, same jump scares, same claustrophobic tunnels. Except this time we've been here before, so none of it feels fresh or frightening. You're just watching people make the same mistakes in the same locations. The original worked because it was Sarah's personal journey through grief and guilt. The sequel is just random people getting eaten by monsters because the first movie made money. There's no deeper meaning, no character development, just a cheap retread with less talented actors and cheaper special effects. They even try to give it a happier ending, which completely misses why the original's bleakness was so effective. But some sequels don't just misunderstand tone, they misunderstand everything. Matt Reeves figured out the secret to monster movies in 2008. Keep the monster mysterious. Cloverfield dropped us into a giant creature attack on New York, but we never found out where it came from or what it wanted. We didn't even really know what it looked like till the very end of the movie. The found footage style made everything feel immediate and real. Plus, that viral marketing campaign had people arguing about the monster's origin for months after the movie came out. Not knowing was half the fun. Was it an alien? A deep-sea creature? Some kind of government experiment? The movie gave you just enough clues to theorize, but never enough to be sure. We then got 10 Cloverfield Lane, which was actually a pretty good movie, but then Netflix decided mystery was overrated, and the Cloverfield paradox showed up in 2018 during the Super Bowl. Literally, there was no warning. Just, hey, this movie exists now, go watch it, people. That should have been the first red flag. Turns out this wasn't even a Cloverfield movie originally, which is very easy to tell if you watch it, but some executives took a random space station action thriller, decided to retrofit it into the Cloverfield universe by adding a bunch of exposition about particle accelerators in parallel dimensions. So now, instead of wondering about this terrifying monster, you get a lecture about how science experiments open portals between realities. The creature that demolished Manhattan? Yeah, it was just some random side effect of some tech bros playing with physics. Mystery solved, excitement dead. The whole thing plays like someone explaining a magic trick while you're still trying to enjoy it. Here's how the monster got there. Here's why it attacked. Here's how it connects to the other movies. Thanks for ruining the fun, Jared. Netflix dumped this thing online with zero promotion because even they knew it was hot garbage. When your own streaming service is embarrassed to market your movie, that tells you everything. Though at least they didn't pad the runtime with recycled footage. Unlike The Hills Have Eyes 2. Wes Craven's The Hills Have Eyes was nasty, brutal horror filmmaking. A suburban family breaks down in the desert and gets hunted by a clan of cannibalistic mutants. Simple setup, effective execution. The movie felt genuinely dangerous because Craven committed to the grime and violence without winking at the audience. Michael Berryman's Pluto was legitimately scary. This wasn't some guy in makeup. This was a genuinely unsettling presence stalking people across the wasteland. The whole cannibal family felt like real people who just happened to eat other people. 8 years later, and Craven came back with The Hills Have Eyes Part 2. Apparently he needed money because this sequel is famous for one thing, using flashbacks to pad the runtime. We're not talking about normal flashbacks either. This movie is so desperate to avoid filming new footage that it gives the dog from the first movie a flashback sequence. Yes, the dog. The German Shepherd from Part 1 gets his own little memory montage where he remembers events from the original film. Again, it is a dog. When your movie is so low on budget that you're recycling footage through the perspective of a pet, you've hit rock bottom. The dog literally has more character development than most of the human cast. The few new mutants we get are nowhere near as intimidating as Pluto. They mostly stumble around grunting while the script kills time with more flashbacks. Even Craven seemed embarrassed by the whole thing. He claimed the studio released it unfinished, which might explain why half the movie is just highlights from the better film you could have been watching instead. Although some directors at least try to make an effort to hide their laziness. Joe Dante knew exactly what he was doing with The Howling. Smart werewolf movie with groundbreaking transformation effects, but also a clever satire of self-help culture and new age therapy nonsense. The whole thing was set in a California retreat center full of hippie counselors who turned out to be lycanthropes. It's the perfect combination of horror and social commentary, with an ending that killed off the main character on live television. Self-contained story, great effects, no sequel needed, done. How can we ruin this? Well, 4 years later, someone looked at this California-based werewolf satire and decided what it really needed was Christopher Lee fighting S&M werewolves in Transylvania. That's not a joke. That is the actual plot of Howling 2, Your Sister is a Werewolf. Also, the names on these sequels are horrible. Just stick with blank 2. Howling 2, that's fine. Just leave it at that. But they ditched everything. Gone was the therapy retreat setting, the social commentary, the sophisticated effects work. Instead, we get cheap rubber werewolf masks, terrible rock music, and a werewolf queen named Sturba who dresses like she's heading to a bondage club. Christopher Lee shows up as some kind of occult investigator.
Stefan Krosko, occult investigator.
Probably wondering what he did to deserve this after playing Dracula for decades. The man was so embarrassed by this movie, he actually apologized to Joe Dante for being in it. The tone swings wildly between attempted scares and unintentional comedy. Nobody involved seemed to understand what made the first movie work. The end credits literally replay the same shot of an actress ripping her shirt off 10 times in a row, which perfectly sums up the filmmaker's priorities. Fans of the original were so disgusted that the rest of the Howling series got dumped straight to video. One sequel managed to kill an entire successful franchise. But that is nothing compared to movies made purely out of legal obligation. Clive Barker created something genuinely unique with Hellraiser, sadomasochistic demons from another dimension who show up when you solve their puzzle box and drag you to hell for eternal torture. The Cenobites weren't just monsters, they were elegant, articulate philosophers of pain with their own twisted code of ethics. Doug Brady's Pinhead became an icon because he was scary and intelligent. These weren't mindless killers, they were entities who viewed torture as a form of enlightenment. Weird, disturbing, but genuinely creative horror with actual themes about desire and consequence. 24 years later, and several terrible sequels later, we get Hellraiser Revelations. This movie exists for one reason only. The studio needed to make something with the Hellraiser name to keep the film rights. That's it. Pure legal obligation disguised as entertainment. They shot the entire thing in 2 weeks. Doug Bradley took one look at the script and then walked away, so they stuck some random actor in knockoff Pinhead makeup and called it a day. The results look like a fan film made by people who hate Hellraiser. Two college bros go to Mexico, find the puzzle box, Pinhead shows up for a few poorly lit scenes, everyone dies, no philosophy, no atmosphere, no reason to exist beyond contractual requirements. The torture scenes are boring. The dialogue is awful, and the whole thing feels like it was written during a lunch break. Critics gave it a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. Fans called it the worst sequel ever made. Even people who defend other terrible Hellraiser movies draw the line at Revelations. When Doug Bradley, who played Pinhead in 8 previous films, refuses to show up, that is not a red flag. That is a giant neon sign saying, "Run away, do not make this." But sometimes even the original director comes back to destroy their own legacy. Stephen King wrote Pet Sematary as a horror story about grief and the stupid decisions it makes you consider. The 1989 movie adaptation understood this perfectly. Louis Creed loses his son in a traffic accident and makes the worst possible choice: use an ancient burial ground to bring him back. What returns isn't his child. It's something wearing his child's face that wants to kill everyone. The whole thing was bleak, emotional horror that ended with Louis embracing his undead wife as she stabs him. Dark, final, complete. Mary Lambert directed it as a serious tragedy about loss and consequence. 3 years later, Lambert came back for Pet Sematary 2. Stephen King wasn't involved this time, which might explain why the sequel feels like it was made by people who watched the first movie with the sound off. Edward Furlong plays a teenager who moves to the same town and discovers the burial ground. Instead of exploring grief and family trauma, we get a weird semi-comedy about zombie stepdads and undead pets. Clancy Brown shows up as an abusive stepfather who gets resurrected and spends the rest of the movie cheerfully murdering people while cracking jokes. Brown is actually entertaining, but he's acting in a completely different movie than everyone else. His scenes play like dark comedy while the rest tries to be serious horror. The tone is all over the place. Where the original dealt with genuine human tragedy, the sequel treats death and resurrection as plot devices for cheap scares. King's story asks serious questions about loss and acceptance. The sequel asks whether zombie stepdads can drive motorcycles. When the 2019 Pet Sematary remake came out, everyone just pretended the 1992 sequel never existed. Sometimes that is the kindest thing you can do. So what have we learned about this? Do not just make a sequel for money. If you want to make money, make a good movie and make it original. Please, for the love of God, don't just copy the same thing over and over like I do until I decide to make a 4th video in this series. Come on! Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. Also, YouTube just rolled out a new feature called Hype Points, where for free, you can give your favorite small creators hype points that helps their videos get seen by more people. If you wanted to give this video some, that would greatly help me out and I'd be very thankful. And if you'd like to watch another one of my videos, you can click the video on screen now.